Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes you feel like you are rushing decisions and getting them wrong, while other times you are super deliberate and accurate? It is that age-old question about speed versus accuracy. And today we're diving into a fascinating study that sheds new light on it. What if I told you that sometimes our brains can't really tell the difference between two seemingly different ways of making decisions? This paper explores a type of decision model called the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model, or OU for short, which is used to understand how we make choices. The big question here is whether this model can always reliably tell us what is going on, especially when we're trying to balance speed and accuracy in our decision. You know how when you have to make a quick decision, you might make more mistakes. And if you take your time, you are usually more accurate. That is called the speed-accuracy trade-off, or SAT. For a long time, scientists thought the main reason for this was how far apart our decision boundaries are. Imagine you have to pick between two options, say option A and option B. The modelers thought that when you are in a hurry, you set these target points closer together, so you reach one faster, but with less certainty. When you have more time, you set them further apart, needing more evidence before deciding, leading to fewer errors. This is called the boundary separation hypothesis. Think of it like a game of pinball. The ball is your accumulating evidence, and the paddles are your decision boundaries. If the paddles are close, the ball hits one quickly, but it might not be the right one. If they're far apart, it takes longer, giving you more time to guide it to the correct target. The standard model for this is the drift diffusion model, or DDM. It has parameters like drift rate, which is how strongly the evidence leans towards one option, diffusion constant for noise, boundary separation for caution, and non-decision time, for things like pressing the button. But here is where things get interesting. Some research shows that we don't always just change how cautious we are. Sometimes when we're stressed for time, we might actually lean into our initial gut feeling and reinforce it. This is like a confirmation bias, but for the evidence we're accumulating, the researchers in this paper are looking at a newer idea, the Self-Excitation Hypothesis, which suggests that under time pressure, our evidence accumulation process actually speeds up as it gets closer to a decision. This is modeled by a specific type of process called the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model, or OM, with a parameter called self-excitation. This new model seems to explain some findings better than the old boundary separation idea, especially when looking at brain activity. So, a previous study by Wang and colleagues suggested that this self-excitation parameter captures the speed-accuracy trade-off really well, and that the boundary separation parameter doesn't change as much. They did a recovery study to see if their model could accurately figure out the true parameters from simulated data. But the authors of this paper we're discussing today looked closer and found a potential problem. They thought the original recovery study might have been too limited, and that there could be issues with how well the model can actually estimate its parameters, especially the boundary separation. To investigate this, they ran their own much bigger recovery study. Imagine simulating thousands and thousands of decisions, making scenarios each with slightly different true parameters for the OUM model. They used two different analysis tools, PDM and Baseflow, to see if they could get back the original true parameters from the simulated data. They varied the number of trials from 100 to 1,000 to see how data quantity affected the results. And here is where they found something really significant. For most of the parameters, like the drift rate, how much information leans one way, self-excitation, how the process speeds up, and non-decision time, the quick setup phase, the model did a pretty good job. But when it came to the boundary separation, how cautious we are, the model struggled. Even with a lot of trials, the correlation between the true value and the estimated value was much lower. They dug deeper and looked at how different levels of self-excitation affected the recovery of boundary separation. What they saw was clear. The more self-excitation there was, the worse the boundary separation was recovered. It seems that when the process is strongly self-exciting, meaning it accelerates rapidly, it becomes really difficult for the model to distinguish changes in how cautious we are, boundary separation from changes in how long the setup phase takes, non-decision time. This leads to a core problem called non-identifiability. Basically, the model can't uniquely figure out the values of certain parameters because different combinations of those parameters produce very similar outcomes in the data. It is like having two different recipes that, when baked, produce almost identical cakes. You can't tell which recipe was used just by looking at the cake. The mathematicians in the study show that as the boundary separation gets very, very large, the distinction between boundary separation and non-decision time breaks down. They mathematically prove that in this extreme case, changes in boundary separation can be perfectly mimicked by changes in non-decision time. This means that when the model is trying to estimate these parameters, if the true boundary separation is large, the model might mistakenly attribute the signal to non-decision time, or vice versa. They even showed a strong negative correlation between errors in the recovered boundary separation and non-decision time. This means that when the model overestimates one, it tends to underestimate the other, and this pattern gets stronger with more self-excitation. This confirms their suspicion the self-exciting often can't tell the difference between how cautious you are and how long your initial setup phase lasts, especially when the self-excitation is high. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that any conclusions drawn from studies using this self-exciting Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model about the boundary separation parameter might be unreliable, especially under conditions where self-excitation is high. For example, if a study found that boundary separation didn't change between a speed condition and an accuracy condition, it might not be because it genuinely didn't change, but because the model simply couldn't detect that change due to this identifiability problem. The authors stress that this doesn't necessarily mean the self-excitation hypothesis is wrong, just that the way we measure boundary separation within this specific model framework can be flawed. The good news is that the researchers offer some solutions. First, they recommend using more advanced analysis tools like Baseflow, which seem to perform slightly better in their study at reducing noise. If you are designing an experiment, they suggest having more trials, adjusting the task difficulty to get drift rates between 1 and 3, and importantly, trying to avoid extreme values for both self-excitation and boundary separation, though they admit this last one is tricky because the models often predict those extremes. They also suggest fixing certain parameters across conditions, if there is a strong theoretical reason to believe they don't change, but warn that this is a big assumption. Ultimately, the main takeaway is to be very cautious when interpreting results related to boundary separation from the self-exciting Ornstein-Uhlenbeck model, while other parameters like self-excitation itself seem to be recovered more reliably. This fundamental limitation in estimating boundary separation significantly impacts the model's usefulness in understanding decision-making. It's a reminder that even our best scientific tools have limitations, and understanding those limitations is crucial for good science. It is great that these researchers are making their code publicly available so other scientists can build on their work or verify their findings. And they're also being transparent about using AI tools for language suggestions, which is a growing trend in academic writing. Now, my take on this. This is a really important piece of research because it highlights a subtle but critical issue in modeling cognitive processes. The self-exciting OUM is a powerful idea for explaining phenomena like confirmation bias in decision-making, but its ability to cleanly disentangle factors like caution versus processing speed is compromised when self-excitation gets high. The authors did a fantastic job of not just identifying the problem through simulations, but also delving into the mathematical reasons behind it. The implication for cognitive psychology is significant. If researchers are using this model and drawing strong conclusions about boundary separation, they might need to evaluate those findings, especially if their experimental conditions likely involved high self-excitation. It is a call for greater rigor in model validation and parameter recovery studies. For future research, it would be fascinating to see if alternative models, perhaps those that don't have this linear dependence of drift on the current state, could capture the self-excitation effect without falling into the same trap. For example, models that have a diminishing rate of self-excitation or a naturally bounded effective drift might offer a cleaner way to study these phenomena. Understanding how to reliably measure how cautious we are versus how fast our cognitive processes are running is key to understanding a huge range of behaviors. This study really underscores the importance of not just proposing new models, but rigorously testing their ability to accurately recover parameters from data. It is a testament to scientific progress that we can identify these complex limitations and work towards more robust explanations of human decision-making. What do you all think about these findings? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more brainy content, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.